Hello once again. I'm Greg Smart, pastor of Pikeville United Methodist Church in Pikeville, Tennessee, and I'm here again with you with some thoughts on Scripture. Today's Scripture lesson involves an incredible dream with an even more incredible prayer. And it's that prayer we're going to focus on today. So pay attention as we work our way through 1 Kings chapter 3, verses 3 through 14. Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of his father David. Only he sacrificed and offered incense at the high places. The king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the principal high place. Solomon used to offer 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, "Ask what I should give you." And Solomon said, "You have shown great and steadfast love to your servant, my father David, because he walked before you in faithfulness, in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart toward you. And you have kept for him this great and steadfast love, and have given him a son to sit on his throne today. And now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David. Although I am only a little child, I do not know how to go out or come in. And your servant is in the midst of the people whom you have chosen, a great people, so numerous they cannot be numbered or counted. Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, able to discern between good and evil. For who can govern this, your great people?" It pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this. God said to him, "Because you have asked this and have not asked for yourself long life or riches, or for the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right, I now do according to your word. Indeed, I give you a wise and discerning mind. No one like you has been before you, and no one like you shall arise after you. I give you also what you have not asked, both riches and honor, all your life. No other king shall compare with you. If you will walk in my ways, keeping my statutes and my commandments as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your life." Well, among the many unanswered questions there is whether this whole scene played out in a dream state. You know, that's a very lucid prayer for someone who's asleep. On the other hand, God's involved, so I guess all the rules kind of go out the window. Well, however it played out, Solomon, in his prayer, makes two recognitions that still speak to us today. The first one was a recognition of the task, and the second was a recognition of necessary humility. First, the task. Solomon is now king. That's not a surprise to him. But for the first time, he recognizes that being king is not an honor that has been given him just for his benefit. In other words, being king, it's not about him. Rather, it's about the people who are now under his care. And you know, these are not just any people. These are God's people. Well, with that recognition comes a second one, which is Solomon realizes he doesn't really know how to do this job. Now, yes, there are some things about being king he knows how to do, like sign a royal decree or throw a banquet. But how does one care for the people of God? How does one properly balance all the different needs within those people? Faced with this task, Solomon is properly humbled. He feels like a child who doesn't even know how to go out or come in. And so Solomon asks God for an understanding mind. Now, this is the fabled wisdom of Solomon. This is where it begins, right here. We still talk about Solomon as being wise, and he was understood to be the wisest person in all the earth. Nobody was like him. But notice, Solomon doesn't ask for wisdom. He asks for an understanding mind that he might be able to do the task he's been given. Well, I don't think we have any actual kings or queens watching this today. If we do, welcome, Your Majesty. But because of that, it might be hard to figure out how this prayer applies to us non-royal folk. And the answer to that is not all that hard. It should be pretty obvious how this would apply to anyone holding a position of leadership. It would start with that first recognition that that position is not about you. It's about the people under your care, under your supervision. And then the humility that comes with knowing you really don't know how to care for those people. But the truth is that Solomon's prayer applies to everyone who follows Christ. Because in its broadest sense, all of us have been given the same task. All of us are asked to love God and love neighbor. And of course, we're not asked just to love the neighbors we already like or the easy neighbors. We are to love all of our neighbors, all those with whom we come into contact. Why? Because all of them are God's people. Each one is made in God's own image. That means every person you meet is precious to God. So is every person you ignore. All of them are God's people. And our task is about them. Now, once we let that sink in, once we realize that that is the truth, then we should have that second recognition that we don't know how to care for God's people. Not all of them, anyway. I mean, if we're being honest, we don't always know how to best care for our own children, much less the children of God that we pass by every day. So this is where we need to understand that we are but children, that we don't know how to even go out or come in. And you know, this really is a moment of humility. This is where we have to admit to God that we're not prepared for this moment. And that's not easy for an awful lot of people. You know, we have spent so much time faking it, pretending that we have it all together, pretending that we have all the answers, that to turn to God and admit we don't, well, that's not just difficult, it's frightening. What we're doing is tearing down our own facade. We are, we're allowing ourselves to be vulnerable. Yet that's when we stand most honestly before God. Finally, stripped of all pride and pretense, we stand before God just as we are. And we become open to God giving us what we need to be the people we need to be. You know, this is really what it means to say, "Here I am, Lord." It is to be open to being equipped for the task and being willing to be sent wherever God would send us. And as we're being sent forth, maybe we ought to ask, as Solomon did, for an understanding mind. A mind that understands that the task before us is never about us. Now, that doesn't mean we don't do things for ourselves. We do. We care for ourselves as certainly as we breathe. But when we stand before the people of God, it is all about them and their needs. Of course, again, this is that point of humility, recognizing that we don't know how to care for the person in front of us. We don't know what they need most. And this is where Barry Kidwell of Mustard Seed Ministries is very helpful. As someone whose entire ministry revolves around the homeless community, Barry will be the first to tell you that you don't treat people like they're homeless. You treat them as equals. You treat them as someone who is loved by God just as much as you are. Because when we do this, we set aside the power imbalance between us, whether that's real or imagined. And then we can meet people just as they are, coming into that just as we are. And when we do that, we're both vulnerable, which means our hearts can really meet. Because then there is nothing in between us. Can you even imagine doing that? Can you imagine standing before someone with no expectations, no preconceived notions, just standing and listening, giving that person all the time that they need? Well, if you can imagine that, and if you can put it into practice, then it's possible you have already received the wisdom of Solomon. And if you're having trouble imagining that, well, maybe you ought to join in with Solomon's prayer. That's all I have for today. I'll be back next week with more thoughts on Scripture.